Barbara, Jeb Phillips' sister-in-law, gave each family member one of these kits to trace their ancestors. In her own family, everyone spat in a test tube and was delighted with the results. It turned out that they were 100% Swedish-Norwegian, not a drop of other blood. Barbara knew that her husband's family were mongrels and thought it would be interesting to know how mixed they were. It's going to be fun. She had no idea dash mixing could have so many different meanings. You never know how it's going to end. But Barbara is one of those women who can light up a room just by walking into it. So the whole Phillips family conducted a spit in a test tube test, and we're going to release the results right after Easter dinner. Phillips' mom Haley did everything right. The dining table was bursting with a variety of vegetables and other side dishes to a magnificent roast lamb with rice and Spanish. The favorite dish of the whole family, Jeb's siblings, older brother Hal and younger sister Marty, were there with their spouses. Jeb invited his current girlfriend, but she declined to spend the day with her grandparents. Their relationship was in its infancy, so they were lucky that they didn't have to eat twice at Easter. Jeb's father, Harold, did the honor by slicing the lamb and handing out a piece to everyone's more sitting at the family table. Even Marty took a bite, apparently after her 2-year experiment with vegetarianism. When their plates were full, Hal said Grace and Harold had made a toast for the love and kindness that this family showed to each other. If anyone noticed the tears rolling from Haley's eyes, no one mentioned it. Haley had a habit of crying when she was happy, when she was watching old movies, or on those rare occasions when she was sad. The family is used to Haley's tears. When everyone had finished eating, Hal and Jeb cleared the table. It was customary at the Phillips house. Mom cooked with Marty's help, and the boys cleared the table and filled the dishwasher. Jeb and Hal returned to the table to find everyone sitting with unopened envelopes in front of their seats. The plan was to read the results and then have a banana cream pie for dessert. While the envelopes were being opened, Haley got up from the table and apologized. Everyone assumed that she had gone to the toilet and continued to read the test results. Harold read his first one, 95% of British Irish, 5% Dutch. As soon as Hal opened the envelope, Barbara snatched it out of his hands, too excited to wait. I knew it. I knew you had an interesting mix. 46% of the British are Irish, 28% of the French are German, and 26% of the Iberians. It's Spanish and Portuguese, right? Barbara handed the printout back to her husband and leaned to the left to look at Marty's printout. Almost the same thing, only Marty has more French-German and less Iberian. What do you say, Jeb? Jeb stared at the printout. The expression on his face testified to the confusion raging in his head. He looked up from the page to focus on Barbara's smiling face, then at his brother and sister, who were sitting on either side of Barbara. Finally, he turned to the head of the table. His father looked back at him. He couldn't read the expression in his father's eyes. Hal broke the silence. Did I just hear the garage door open? Where's Mom? I got up from the table and looked out the front window. Dad, Mom's pulling out of the driveway. What the hell is going on? Marty took out her phone and dialed her mother's number. Now everyone was looking at Marty as she waited for Haley to answer the phone. The room was quiet enough to hear Haley's voice when she picked up the phone. I'm sorry, baby. Tell everyone I'm sorry. And then the connection was interrupted. Dad, what's going on? Harold looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Jeb, why don't you read what the service sent you? Jeb hesitated. Did his father really want this to become public? Go on, son. It says here that I am 50% Italian, 22% Iberian, and 28% French-German. Suddenly, Jeb remembered all the taunts he and Ted Rizzo had received at school because they were similar. He looked at his father. Dad, did you know? The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, watching and waiting for Harold's response. I began to suspect this when I saw you and Ted Rizzo standing next to each other on your high school baseball team. It happened around the same time that Ted's mother and father broke up. No one knew why they broke up, but it didn't take a genius to assume that Ted's mother saw the same thing as me. Harold turned to the others. I don't mean to be rude, but I think Jeb and I need to discuss this in private. Outside on the porch, Hal, Marty, I think you should give your mother some time before calling her. And when you, please be kind. Now is not the time to pry answers out of her. I have my own questions that I think should be answered first. Please respect your mother's privacy and my privacy. Jeb, grab your drink and let's go outside. Jeb and Harold went out onto the porch and sat down. Jeb didn't wait to ask his first question. So Mr. Rizzo is my father? Well, I'm your father. Please don't insult the 22 years I've spent raising you by denying me this title. I'm sorry, Dad. That didn't sound right. You too. I wanted to say that just because I didn't contribute to your DNA, it doesn't mean that you're not my son or that I don't love you as much as I've always loved you. But to answer your question, maybe Rizzo is your biological father. I don't know. We'll need to ask your mom when she's ready. Where do you think she went? Harold actually laughed. Where else? I suspect she's sitting on your Aunt April's couch right now, crying her eyes out in her sister's arms. Dad, you said you started suspecting more than 12 years ago. Why didn't you ever confront Mom and ask her about it? A lot of reasons. First of all, I didn't want anything to come between us. By the time I began to suspect this, I was hopelessly in love with you as my son. I've always been proud of you and being your father. I didn't want anything to change. Harold took a sip from his whiskey glass and continued. I hope you didn't think less of me as a man, but the second reason is that I love your mother so damn much that I didn't want that to change either. As far as I could tell, your mother was in love with me. She showed me this love every day when we were married. When I think about it, her love only intensified after you were born. If she had an affair with Ted's father, she's been trying to make it up to me for the last 20-odd years. I was happy to let her do that. But if you like the status quo, why did you agree to Barbara's offer to do a DNA test? Damn it, Jeb, you know your brother's wife? Do you think she'll ever let it go? This girl is so damn innocent that it never occurred to her that our family might have a skeleton in the closet. Your brother is a lucky guy. Father and son laughed as Harold refilled Jeb's glass with 2 fingers. Besides, it's time to finish the job. Your mother and I have had a secret all these years, and I wanted to know who, what, and why. I probably could have done it in a more appropriate setting, but I think I fell into the category of dumbass. That, and I thought your mom would come to me with some answers before it got this far. I really didn't expect her to snap like that. Now the two of them sat and let the silence of Haley's backyard fill their senses without saying a word. Haley's spring flowers, white lilies, blue irises, and colorful pansies decorated the brick-lined courtyard. It was a really peaceful, beautiful place. 10 minutes passed in silence before Help poked his head out the back door. Dad, Jeb, we're all gonna leave if you don't need us here. Marty tried to call her mom again, but got a voicemail. You know Marty and Barbara. Neither of these two would have been able to part with it so easily. Marty was standing right behind Hal when he said that and expressed her displeasure by hitting her older brother on the arm. Marty hugged her father and then her brother Jeb, practically taking his breath away. There were tears in her eyes. Marty's husband shook hands with everyone and led Marty away. Barbara was next, repeating the sequence of actions. She hugged Harold and hugged Jeb, kissing him on the cheek before Hal led her out the Ford side gate. Harold watched them go and motioned Jeb to a chair on the patio. Let's finish our drinks. I'd like you to do me a favor. Could you ask Ted if he knows how to contact his father? Jeb looked at his father. Why? You're not going to do anything stupid, are you? No, it's not that it hasn't crossed my mind once or twice. Sometimes I fantasize about hurting him, but right now I just need to talk to him before I talk to your mother. That's the problem with infidelity, Jeb. It deprives you of trust in the words and deeds of your spouse. Remember this if and when you get married. You'll have plenty of opportunities to lose your way, and you may think you can handle it without hurting your marriage. But it always takes at least a little time out of a relationship. It doesn't matter how insignificant betrayal may seem at that moment. Okay, Dad, if you promise, I'll call Ted tomorrow. Last I heard, Mr. Rizzo was selling cars up north in Dallas. What are you going to tell Ted? Let's wait until the situation in our family is clarified. Then Ted and I will talk about our relationship. I think Ted has always wondered that himself, if he doesn't already know. Thanks. I'd like to surprise Tony Rizzo if I can. Now that the lid was off the kettle, no one wanted to waste time. Jeb called Ted on Monday morning, and after the usual showdown, found out where Ted's father worked without revealing the reasons. Just 2 friends who were exchanging shit. How's your mom? How's your dad doing? What are they up to? At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, Harold Phillips knocked on the door of Tony Rizzo's sales office at the Lexus dealership where Tony worked. When Tony looked up from the papers on his desk, old feelings stirred inside Harold. The desire to punch this asshole right in the nose. Harold, it's been over a dozen years, and Tony still couldn't come up with a reason why his old neighbor was standing in the doorway of his office. It took Harold a moment to collect his thoughts. Hi, Tony. I was wondering if you had a minute to talk. This is a private conversation, so maybe we could go somewhere less crowded. Tony's thoughts began to clear up. Of course, let's get a car and take a ride. Tony grabbed a bunch of car keys and held the door open for Harold. They drove to the nearest park and got out without saying a word. Both men sat down on a bench facing a small pond. I want to know about you and Haley. Tony was still trying to catch up. Harold's words were not what he expected. Surprise showed on his face. What do you mean, me and Haley? There has never been anything between your wife and me. Tony's attempt to dodge angered Harold. What the hell do you mean? Nothing. Don't mess with me, Tony. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Jeb and Ted are brothers. And Jeb's DNA just showed. He's half Italian Rizzo. Although Tony found the situation funny, he was smart enough to realize that Harold would not find it funny. After all, Tony had a dozen years to get used to the idea. Harold is only now learning the truth. Tony stifled a laugh. God, Harold, didn't you and Haley talk? You weren't looking for me. At first I thought it was you making love to my ex, Sophia. When I saw Jeb and Ted playing together on the baseball field, I decided that they both must be your sons because I've never touched your wife. In fact, I was ready to come down and kick your ass. Fortunately, I started the fight with Sophia first. I told her I'd make you pay. That's when Sophia told me the truth. Paul Mott said he is Ted's father. Mott said he, who lived on the corner before he moved west. Harold was stunned. Are you saying that Mott said he used Sophia and Haley? Sophia didn't say if she knew anything about Haley. Although I think she suspected, Sophia said Mott said he was most likely Ted's father, because they had an affair when she got pregnant. Why didn't you tell me? Because you and Haley seemed happy. I thought you two had a good marriage. Damn, I thought that if I figured out Ted and Jeb, then you probably figured it out too. And who am I to make a fuss if you don't talk? Harold had to think about it, but it really made sense. Harold, I'm sorry if you think I should have said something. After I found out, I knew that Sophia and I were getting divorced. I couldn't accept her betrayal, but I didn't want to be the reason for your divorce. Plus, let me confess to a more selfish reason. If you were around, you could keep a close eye on Ted. And you did it. Half the reason he turned out to be a wonderful young man is because of your influence on him. I know this and will always be grateful for it. It's true. After Rizzo's divorce, and until Sophia left 3 years ago, the boys became close, and Harold was almost a second father to Ted. Tony stared at Harold for a minute, watching him try to digest this information. It makes you dizzy, doesn't it? Is she dizzy? I'm ready to throw up. I'm so dizzy. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about beating the shit out of you. And here you are, a victim just like me. I'm glad you're not one of those hotheads who barges into my office with guns drawn. Well, now I have to find Mott Steady and talk to him. Any idea where he went? Tony replied, Mott Steady is dead. Dead? How? A boating accident. He drank too much, rode his boat on Lake Mead, and fell overboard. The smile on Tony's face as he talked about Mott Steady's fate sent a chill down Harold. The smile lasted on his face for only a split second before it was replaced by an expression of deep concern. It's a shame, really. We could both probably sue the bastard for child support or something. But in the end, it's probably better this way. I don't think any of the boys would want to hang out with an asshole who goes around and seduces married women. With these words, both men got up from the park bench and headed for the car. As they were returning to the dealership, Tony asked what had led to this after all these. Harold explained how DNA tests sped up the whole thing, including Haley's trip to her bat. It's none of my business, but what are you going to do with Haley now? I guess now that Mott said he's gone, I'm going to have to get answers from Haley. I was hoping to hear both sides of this story, but overall, I'm not saddened to hear that this asshole drowned. Does Ted know? No, Ted still believes that I'm his father. I try to keep in touch with him, show that I care about him, despite the divorce from his mother. Some days are better than others. One of us calls the other at least once every 2 weeks. Harold nodded. Jeb, knowing that he is half Italian, will probably complicate things. He thinks he's Ted's stepbrother and you're his biological father. When I tell him the truth, he will definitely want more answers, and eventually it will. You and Sophia should probably get ready. Tony was suddenly overcome with sadness. He loved Ted and didn't want that to change. Can you ask Jeb to wait a week? Give me a chance to talk to Ted. You know I will do that, and I know Jeb will agree. Good luck, Tony and thinks. By the time Harold got into his car and drove home, he was physically, emotionally, and mentally. Before one of the exits, when he headed south, there was a sign of a chain hotel. Harold decided to stop and rent a room. For a few hours or overnight, he would decide later. With the key to the room in his hands, Harold changed his mind about taking a nap. The gentleman's club across the street seemed to be calling his name. He hadn't been to the club since his party almost 30 years ago. In fact, in all these years, Harold had only seen one woman other than his wife. It's time to fix this. When Harold entered the club, he almost came back. What the hell am I doing here? But he paid the entrance fee and sat down at the far end of the hall. A waitress in his suit took his drink order, and he watched a surprisingly attractive woman. An Asian girl came up to him and asked if he wanted a lap dance. Harold succumbed to temptation, but refused when he was told that he would be kicked out of the club if he touched her during a private dance. Several other girls were dancing on stage while Harold sipped his drink. All the girls did a decent job showing enthusiasm. Harold tipped each girl. Harold ordered a second bourbon while watching an Asian woman dance on stage. He couldn't believe that a woman could bend in half like that. He went up on stage and slipped in a $10 bill. Harold couldn't take his eyes off her, and she noticed. After finishing her dance, she approached Harold for the second time. We can go to the back to a separate room. We can be alone there. Harold will never know, because instead of following the girl into the back room, he got up, handed her another $10 bill, muttered, "Thank you," and walked out the door. There was a liquor store next door. Harold bought a bottle of bourbon and went to his room. The next morning, Harold woke up with a splitting headache. He looked at his watch. Damn it, it was 9:30. There was a terrible taste in his mouth. No wonder, because the last time he brushed his teeth was yesterday morning. Harold put on trousers and a t-shirt and went to the office. He grabbed a pack of aspirin, a toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, and a cup of coffee before returning to his room. The shower helped, and after an hour he felt more human. He dialed Haley's number and was glad when she picked up the phone. "We need to talk. I'm at work right now. When do you want to meet?" "I can be home in an hour." "Can you take the rest of the day off?" "Why do you ask? Where are you?" Harold's headache was coming back, and it was making him unhappy. "It doesn't matter where I am. Just tell me if you can come home soon." Harold heard Haley start to cry. "I'll be there. I love." Harold hung up the phone. As Harold drove north on the freeway, he wondered why. After all these years, he was so angry. He had known for years that Jeb was not his biological son. He had always suspected that Rizzo was the father. Was part of his anger the new knowledge that Haley had made love to this Mazzetti, and it was Mazzetti who conceived Jeb? Heck, he always hated that asshole. Harold realized that no matter how deep you drive, the feeling of being cuckolded, those feelings always remain. "I should have used that Asian girl last night." He said it out loud in the car, but he knew better. He had grown up and was no longer the kind of person who broke promises. Having broken his vows many years ago, he promised himself never to make the same mistake again. Haley was already home when Harold pulled into the driveway. He entered the house to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Haley was sitting at the same dining table, in the same place where Harold had last seen her 3 days ago. So much has happened since Easter. He thought to himself as he watched Haley open a box of pastries from his favorite bakery. "Bribery?" Harold said it with a smile in his voice. He loved this woman. "Who said it was for you?" Haley replied, taking a bite of a sweet roll with cream cheese. Haley's humor was one of the things Harold loved about her, and she knew it. He appreciated her attempt to brighten up the moment. "But it's time to get serious. Tell me about Paul Mazzetti." Haley even flinched when Harold said that name. She suddenly became small and scared. Could this be the end of her marriage? How did Harold know it was Paul? All these thoughts whirled through her head. Having nothing else to help her collect her thoughts, Haley stood up and poured coffee into the 2 cups in front of her. She handed 1 coffee cup and a box of brownies to Harold. Harold sat and waited, without taking a sip of coffee or taking a bite of a cinnamon bun. Haley finally started talking. It happened twice. I'm sorry. I would give anything to fix it. Then I got pregnant with Jeb. I swear, I thought Jeb was yours. Everyone was saying how much he looked like me and my brothers. That was until he started to grow up. And I saw Jeb and Ted together when they were in 5th grade. I still remember that terrible moment. It was during the tour when Sophia and I were escorts. I looked at Sophia when the 2 boys were waiting for the bus together. I could see it in Sophia's eyes, even though she didn't even say a word. We both knew. We never talked about it, even after Tony dumped Sophia and filed for divorce. Even when Sophia put the house up for sale and left town, Harold was tired of rambling. He wanted answers. Tell me how it started. Haley looked Harold straight in the eye. When I tell you, I want you to understand something. I don't justify my behavior, and I don't blame anyone but myself. I also want you to know that Jeb has been your son in everything but DNA since he started growing in my stomach. He's our son, yours and mine. I told Jeb the same thing Sunday night. I'm glad. He loves you and needs you. It started with Paul 6 months after Hal was born. I was still struggling with the extra pounds after pregnancy and felt fat and ugly. Harold interrupted Haley. Don't tell me that I felt fat and ugly nonsense. When have I ever said that you're not beautiful? Considering Harold's outburst, Haley's response was calm. Much calmer than she felt. You didn't have to say that. All you had to do was use that fool from work that year, when you two were maintaining your romance before and after Hal was born. If Haley had pulled out a shotgun and shot Harold in the chest, the effect of her words couldn't have been more serious. He sat with his mouth open and just stared, not saying a word. What? Did you think I didn't know? Did you really think that you were so cunning that I didn't smell her perfume on you when you were late after working all evening on important projects? Harold still hadn't said a word. So Haley continued, I wasn't going to cheat or settle scores. All I wanted was for you to understand that you still love me and want me to be your wife. Not this cheater. What kind of fool would try to steal a man from his wife who had just given birth to his little son? Paul took advantage of the situation. One evening he was passing by the house. I just got home and Hal was sitting in the back seat. I had groceries in the back of the car, and Hal was yelling at the top of his voice because he was dirty. Paul stopped, and while I was changing Hal's clothes, Paul brought groceries. You've been working late again. I invited Paul to sit and have a beer while I put out the groceries. Paul was charming, and I told him more than I should have. It was Paul's fault and my downfall. He was a master of seduction with his charm and good looks. I was a lonely, annoyed young mom with low self-esteem. For the next few weeks, Paul seemed to be available any time I needed to do something. Call me any time, he said. That's what I did. When the garage door jammed and you were at work, Paul fixed it. When an unpleasant smell came from the oven, Paul found a dead mouse trapped inside. And every time he came, he told me how beautiful I was. He even gave me a bouquet of flowers. They've been sitting right there on the dining table for 4 days, and you haven't even noticed them. Then one day he kissed me. Do you want specifics? For example, was he better than you or bigger than you? Harold just shook his head. He was still trying to process the fact that Haley knew about their affair. An affair with a colleague that lasted 8 months before he stopped it. He remembered why it was over, and he felt Haley slipping away from him and realized how much he loved her. He remembered the fear when Janice Muller threatened to call Haley and tell her all about their affair. He dodged a bullet. The affair lasted for almost a year, and his wife did not find out anything. It was a secret that Harold had been keeping for the past 20-odd years. Haley didn't finish, and her words interrupted his thoughts. Okay, but I'll tell you that he was neither one nor the other. No better, no more. But he was there when I needed a friend. Only he wasn't a real friend. Just another asshole with an ego who wanted to distinguish himself. A couple of days after that first time, he came back, and we did it again. 2 things happened after that second time. Firstly, my conscience tormented me so much that I cried nonstop for 2 days. Secondly, the next day you came home right after work and kissed me like you hadn't kissed me in almost a year, and I told you I hadn't cooked dinner. You took Hal and me to Sullivan's for a delicious dinner. We made love that night and every night for the next week. I was over the moon. You were my husband again. I thought that was the week Jeb was conceived because it was my fertility week. It never occurred to me that Paul was a father until the day of the tour. Was he the only one? Haley was furious, and her voice rose as she answered. Yes. Was Janice Muller the only one? Well, she even knew and remembered her name. Yes, I was, and I'm sorry. It was stupid of me, and that's the one thing I'm most ashamed of in my whole life. Well, I think there are two of us. What should we do now? I know you've always hated Paul, and now you know that we had an affair, even if it was a short one, and that he's Jeb's biological father. Can you at least look at me after that? I still love you, Haley. I still want to be your husband, friend, and lover. I want us to grow old together. I'm not naive. There may be some consequences after that. Maybe a few quarrels, but I want you to come home. Today, Haley got up from her chair and sat on Harold's lap. She put her arms around his neck and kissed him. Take me to bed, and he did it. After they made love, they got up and ordered Thai dishes for dinner. Harold and Haley were sitting on the back porch eating spring rolls, green curry, and pad Thai. Frank Goodpino agreed and talked. Harold, please tell me you're not going to do anything stupid and harass Paul right now. Haley, do me a favor and stop calling him Paul. Call him Mazzetti or asshole, but not Paul. And to answer your question, no, I'm not going to pursue him. I can't because Mazzetti is dead. Dead? How do you know that? Because Tony Rizzo told me that Mazzetti died in a boating accident. Did Tony tell you? Do you think so? I don't know, and I don't care. But not everyone whose name ends in a vowel gets into the crowd. So just talk about it. You need to work on your soprano accent if you're going to do that. You're not good at it. The same crazy humor that made Harold laugh. They should have been fine. I'll stop speaking with a New Jersey accent if you promise to do one thing for me. Oh my God, this is going to be great. What's it? Shave down there? What? What's it going to be? Kidding. I'm 46 years old and you want me to shave? You're 46 and you're still beautiful. I promise it's worth it. And if you don't like it, you can always grow them back. They will itch. That's what everyone says. Harold was on the verge of despair. If it itches, I'll scratch it. Okay, but you have to do one thing for me. Harold was full of hope now. Anything. You have to stop shaving every day and keep an eye on the 5 o'clock shadow. The look of Jason Statham. Really? Is that all? Agreed. Haley was surprised. They'd been married for 27 years, and she could count on her fingers how many mornings Harold hadn't shaved. He must be desperate. She guessed it when he took her upstairs and started filling the tub with warm water. It took almost 20 minutes the first time, but it was worth it for Harold. Damn it, it was wonderful. It was worth it for Haley too, because Harold kept his promise by making her take the time to do it. A little over a week later, on a Saturday afternoon, Jeb and Ted knocked on the front door. Harold was glad to see the two boys, and even more glad to see that they were both smiling. I can't believe this bomb is my brother. Ted said this while laughing. Dad and I talked on Thursday, and he told me all about it. It made me wonder how much I owe you, Mr. Phillips. You've been by my side since my parents split up. I know I wouldn't have gone into engineering if you hadn't encouraged me. All I can say is thank you. Harold hugged Ted. You're welcome, and you know that you are always welcome in our house. The world is a crazy place, almost as crazy as this house. Will you and Dad sort it out? We're going to be fine. He's a funny guy. He was more worried about my mom and you. He said that I should never think badly of my mother, but everyone would screw up, and she would always love me and be my mom. He said that you were the one I should look up to. The way you and Mrs. Phillips stood it and worked to save your marriage. How you have shown rare masculinity in all this. I understand what he's talking about. Thanks again. Harold smiled. I told Jeb the other day, and I'll tell you. When you get married, don't let the sweet ass turn your head. Haley and I are a rare exception. Few couples survive infidelity. Now let's go to the garden. Haley is back, and we'll be glad if you two visit her. I'll get us all a beer. Harold was taking 4 cans of beer out of the fridge when he saw this. There is a fresh banana cream pie on the second shelf. He never got a piece of pie on Easter Sunday. Harold smiled. I think I'd better keep it. End.